Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to HighRoad U. We are HighRoad Solutions is a qualified provider of CAA credits from ASAE. We're excited to host you again. It's hard to believe we're already in the month of June. Just to introduce myself, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Manisha Mangus. I am the Director of Consulting at HighRoad Solutions. I have been in the consulting world of association marketing for about 15 years or so. I've done kind of the whole gamut of website strategy to social media, field marketing, and change management consulting. I do have an expertise or an area of focus in lead generation, which again is a topic that's now suddenly of more interest as associations need to really move to a growth model, or they're understanding or realizing that they need to move to a growth model, and what they can do kind of in the world of digital marketing to make that, to facilitate that. So as always, we always invite you different ways to connect with us, certainly. Hopefully you are all subscribers to our HighRoad U blog. We have a number of webinars on demand that are available. We've produced quite a bit of material. We have a number of ebooks on marketing automation or other topics that are of interest, that probably of interest to you. So we encourage you to reach out to us. If there are particular topics that you'd like us to see, that you'd like us to discuss or further delve into, certainly feel free to reach out to us. You can directly connect with me on Twitter or find me on LinkedIn. So let's go ahead and get started for the overview of this month's topic, which is essentially using digital metrics to gain member insights. So this is going to be a topic heavy on concepts, because we are now talking outside of tool-based structure. We are talking about some conceptual items. So I'll leave you with some items to think about, and throughout the month, if you have specific questions, we certainly encourage you again to kind of reach out to me in advance so that I can see them into the presentation. But we're going to talk about a very kind of overview, high-level discussion about what that actually means, especially with regards to what metrics are out there today, not necessarily how to find them, because certainly you'll see that finding the metrics now, today, is no longer the challenge. It's just really kind of coming to an agreement on what do you do with these, and more importantly, how do you translate these, and how do you turn them into something actionable that you can continue to strive and improve. So just to level set, metrics, why are metrics so important? Right, so likely you've experienced pressure from your management teams, from your executive teams, hopefully, who are asking you, like, how are we doing? Right? How is our program doing? How are we doing overall as an organization? Or it could be from a tools-based perspective of how, in the world of digital marketing, we've got our website, we've got our private community, we've got social media going. How are we doing on all this? So metrics are important because it's a way to measure that performance. So we see a lot of organizations struggle with the fact that metrics are all over the board. So, one department within an organization will evaluate the success of something based on open rates, if email communications is the primary digital vehicle that they use to promote the program. Another group will use a set of conversion metrics to measure the success of the program, right? So there's no standardization, and that's really what the intent is. For metrics across the board, KPIs, key performance indicators, there needs to be a consistent way in which to measure. And so there has to be some sort of consensus kind of amongst the group that you're in, as well as higher along the organization, is to kind of understanding what that actually means, right? So again, if we're looking to measure performance, which metrics do we want to measure consistently across the board, and what intervals? And that makes a difference, because it's really hard to interpret results, right, or gain insights, or actually understand what these metrics mean if we're changing the definition of them, or we're not being consistent in what we're tracking. Right, so a very kind of easy way for associations to essentially evaluate how they're going about their programs and how they're measuring success. So the big question comes out of this is, it's great that we have these metrics. What do we do about them? Right? What are actionable metrics, and how do you decide what to measure? And that's, again, a lot of these questions that I put here. These are questions that organizations struggle with, and we often assist them with them. We assist them kind of in that capacity, right? We go through an analysis to kind of say, across the board, what do we want to measure, right? Not everything, because, that can be overwhelming, but what is the most important thing that we would point to and say, this would be successful, right? And then there are other discussions that talk about how do you assign the value to those metrics, right? Is it a one-to-one to say that, the bounce rate on a website is the same value as we would consider, an open rate on an email to be the same as the equivalent of someone coming to the website and then leaving, so the bounce rate, right? Or is it a weighted index, right? So it's important because you're putting value on those metrics themselves. An open rate, most digital marketers today will tell you an open rate is great, but that's not really the measurement of success. It's one element of a measurement of success. So now you'll start to see these more advanced metrics come to play where they're indices, right? They're ratios. There's a rate of something, right? It's over something or it's a comparison, right? Positive versus negative impressions, things like that, right? So again, there's a level of sophistication in taking all these individual metric data points and somehow stringing them together to say that, individually, someone coming to a page, while it is a measurement of performance, it is not the measurement of success that we're looking for. To us, a measurement of success would be someone were to open the email, they would click through on the link, on the call to action, they would land on the page, and then they would do something subsequently on that page to go somewhere else. The string of those all strung together, that measures our composite index for success. That is the metric that we want to look at. We want to see the weighted value of how people do things with us and interact with us, right? So the bigger challenge here is interpreting those results, right? So obviously you're collecting all these pieces, but after you've collected all these pieces, what actions do you take? And more importantly, how do you find those insights? And that's usually a struggle in most organizations because insights are not something that is obvious. It doesn't pop up and say big red arrow to say here's an insight, right? So we often talk about the confusion, or rather the sometimes misnomers of data versus insights, and we definitely kind of want to point that out to say that data is typically information in a raw, unorganized format, right? It's in a format where you've just got a listing number. It's number of page views, it's number of likes, it's number of shares just across something, right? But it's not particularly insights. And the definition is, can you do something with the data? Like, will the data, if you're looking at it, will it tell you what you should do next? And the answer is typically no, not unless you do something to it. Not unless you have an overlay, right, of someone advising you in some capacity, or you know the market, and you're looking to answer specific questions, right? So insights are actionable, data-driven findings that create the business value. So if you're looking at a spreadsheet, unlikely to be able to elicit insights directly. If you look at the spreadsheet and then start to ask and kind of glean to say, like, can you filter it and show me over the past year the number of products that have been purchased in a product category by a certain member type, that is now you're moving into kind of like, okay, let's translate the data and let's look at it from an insight perspective. So it's different from raw data, right? And it's the whole point of this is to kind of consume the information and translate it in a way so that you in turn can make a conclusion, right? Either you should do something differently than what's currently happening today, or you should go back and continue to monitor. All right, so insight would be you're looking at the data, you're looking at people who have attended all of your educational events over the course of the year. You're noticing that most people, they prefer the in-person education series as opposed to the on-demand webinars. And you're looking at that just from attendance numbers, you're looking at from a open rates, communications perspective, perhaps it's a weighted combination where people are opening the email, they're clicking on a link, they're now landing on a page, they're seeing that, oh, okay, the event is in person, I'm going to register, or it's not in person, I can download the link, and they choose not to, right? So again, that's a very literal translation of how you would interpret that, but that's an insight, right? You're actually making kind of a finding or some sort of translation of the data that you're looking at to say that this is what we think is happening. And I use that kind of as an example because usually we often see the opposite, right? So often you'll see a lot of insights that are not driven by data. I mean, we're finding this more and more with organizations that are relying a little bit too much on the legacy oral history of, we've not done this in the past, or in the past it's traditionally been this way, right? And trying to move these organizations to move towards that data-driven decision-making. Data-driven decision-making is about these insights, right? It is not about collecting the data, and it is not about saying that we look at data. It is, the whole point of that is to say we look at data and we infer that based on the following things that are sitting out there, this is what we can infer, and therefore we will move forward on that aspect. So what we call a traditional one-dimensional set of data is most of what's sitting out there today, right? So the big challenge is that in today's world, there is a lot of data that we have access to. It's a challenge, it's a different kind of challenge. We'd say 10 years ago, we struggled with collecting as much information as we have access to our fingertips today, right? So back in the day, Web Trends was a big source. Google Analytics was starting to come along. Certainly nobody thought about social media and those clicks and likes and things like that. Perhaps people were more on impressions based on banner ads, print distribution, right, direct email, or not direct email, but direct mail conversion points, right? So those were kind of the traditional data set that was sitting out there, right? So at minimum, here's kind of the first flat level today of data that's sitting out there in all these different sources, right? And that's the advantage today. The disadvantage is not quite knowing which metrics in here are most important for your organization, identifying which metrics are of strategic value to you, and then figuring out kind of what insights can you infer from this. Because somebody visited your Facebook page, can you say that, your program is a success? What if we say somebody visited the Facebook page and then they shared your post? Can we say that is a success? Do we link it across the board with another data point? Not necessarily in the world of social media, but do we try to link it to, they often participate with us online by purchasing something, right? So can we infer that because we put that post on social media, on Facebook, did that influence how they purchased the product in our e-commerce system? Right? Again, you can make that inference from a paid media perspective as well. Did it work? Did what we do in the world of social media when we did a paid advertisement, did it actually influence and impact someone actually purchasing something on our site? So those are the insights that you're looking for. But they start with this one-dimensional set of data. Really, the value here is kind of looking at this critically, figuring out what's important for your organization and your team and what you're trying to track, and then figuring out what those connection points are. Right, so there's so many different touch points out there today than there was before. Right, you're sitting on a ton of data that's inside of your AMS. In addition to that, you've got your content management system operating as well. You've got all your other digital properties sitting out there collecting statistics and metrics. So you really have to kind of figure out where are your sources? Where are you going to get that information? More importantly, what do these metrics mean? And that might be like a basic level. Some people might think that's a basic understanding. Of course, everybody would know that, but you do need to be on the same page, right? Again, if you've heard some of our webinars before, especially when we've talked about social media and metrics, the definition of an engagement, is it a click or is it a like, or is it a share, or is it a combination, or is it a weighted combination? Those things matter because, again, you're trying to go to a standardized way in which to evaluate. You need to make sure within your organization that everyone is aware that, if somebody clicks on it, we see that as a level of engagement other than liking it. Liking it in our world seems much more passive. Liking it is the equivalent of an impression, right? Kind of like drive by, see it on the billboard, acknowledge it exists, but I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to get off the highway, off the freeway and, go to the exit where this billboard is pointing me to. Right? So it's a different way in which to evaluate, but it really, getting to the meaning of those and understanding what they mean is just as important. And of course, you want to standardize across the board. You want to make sure that you're being consistent in how you use those. Right? So figuring out which sources you need, which metrics you need, which ones you want to actually get into, those require kind of a combination of know-how, right? The expertise of people who are living, breathing these metrics today, figuring out and understanding, more importantly, what your strategy is overall. They're really thinking about what is this all adding back to? There's additive value here, and when we're talking about, we typically talk about personas as a comprehensive 360-degree view of your profile, of your target audience. do these metrics contribute to that? So again, we called what I showed on the previous slide is kind of the one-dimensional data model. Here's today's multi-dimensional data model. So again, 10 to 15 years ago, this picture looked very different. Typically, you would see the AMS starting in the middle, right, instead of the person, right? So you've definitely seen a shift, kind of a transformative change in the world of digital marketing that is acknowledging that everything starts with this consumer in the middle, right? What they feel is important to them, making sure that the content gets to them at the right time, that it's relevant, all of that, their buying behavior patterns, all of that stems from them. So your insights that you're trying to glean are trying to hit on those items. So again, you look at all these different data sources that are sitting out here. You've got your email automation system. Part of that is your email marketing system. You've got your email preference center collecting preferences directly, feeding into what the person likes to consume. You've got their participation as you hit them on event marketing areas, when you send them newsletter publications, when you send them renewal notices. These are all kind of all the interactions that you have with them. But you're always looking to collect. You are collecting data. You're always looking to collect these insights. If you think of it from this perspective, this forces you to think about it from a holistic view, from the comprehensive profile view, where you're thinking about all the elements that are being consumed, all the different things and programs that are being provided to this particular user, to your target audience, and then in turn, what they're doing with it, right? How they're reacting and how they're responding. Very different from the approach where you say, let's look at the number of page views and let's look at the bounce rate, and then let's look at the number of return visits. Can we glean something from those three statistics on its own? Right, so the point that we're trying to make here is that, you know, the data that's available kind of across the board now, because it's become so sophisticated, because it's become very kind of pervasive and you have access to all this information, it takes a certain level of skill to now figure out, like, how am I going to figure out, you know, based on what they do and all these properties, what does it mean to me? More importantly, how can I measure it for success? Right, so it's just something that, you know, to think about from in this model, right? So your user is still kind of centered in the middle. You've got all your periphery systems around it, collecting information, storing information, providing those pieces. And now the question is, what do you do with all this? So now that we have all this information, you know, working for us, available at our fingertips, right? What do we do with it? So what we found is that you typically need a framework to interpret those metrics. Right, you need something to start with, right? And usually it starts with a kind of a strategic question when we do our workshops. Is, you know, we typically ask, well, what do you want to learn from your target audience? And that's a really important question, right? And then why do you want to know that, right? So again, you can kind of see where this goes. Is what do you want to learn, and the why is kind of the actionable item. So what are you going to do if you've learned this thing about, you know, if you learn this item about your target audience, what in turn will that do? What in turn will you do with that information? What action will you take? How do we take that into an insight and take that data point and translate it into an actionable item that you can act on? So from that perspective, what we find is helpful, and I thought this was a good framework and you know, kind of a process or a way in which to group some of your metrics together is to kind of think of it from that perspective. You're still always thinking about your target audience and what they do, how they interact with you, right? So at one level, there's that awareness factor, right? So, you know, some of you are familiar with the inbound marketing methodology. It's very similar in that you've got these strangers sitting out there, these people who possibly know a little bit about you or don't know much, but they know something, or perhaps they don't know anything. So what you're initially putting out to them to market is about building awareness. So therefore, your first set of metrics that you may want to collect or group together is those awareness metrics, right? So some of those that bubble up to the surface are, you know, impressions. You know, are they aware of your brand? Kind of where are they sitting out there in which digital channels? You know, are they opening your emails? Things like that. So very kind of basic, but you can categorize them into that awareness bucket. The next set, you know, as you kind of move them, I put this into a pyramid format just to show that, again, you know, a lot of this overplays on top of a lot of other marketing principles that you have heard, but it's kind of similarly going down into that funnel, right? So you're moving from awareness to participation. What kind of metrics look at participation? Is it page visits, or is it in the world of social media? Is it a share? Is it someone leaving a comment on a post that you've already put, Or is it someone sharing a product review or actually doing a product review on one of your products on your e-commerce site, right? So that's the one next level of engagement. If you think about, how do you combine all these together, you're still looking for insights, but now you're able to at least group them together. So you're working kind of similarly in that multidimensional data model. You're just grouping things together, so it makes it a little bit easier to figure out what am I looking at and how do I find all that information and put it together, and then what's the next step I take. So moving from participation to engagement. Now, obviously, if you're working with your target market and these are members, you really want to think about, what constitutes as engagement, and how are we defining engagement? It could be one organization uses definition of engagement as they do leave a comment on a blog post, or they're doing a product review, or something similar in nature, or that falls into the participation category. So again, from organization to organization, it'll be different, right? But you are looking for something that demonstrates a level of further engagement with your organization or with your program that isn't defined by participation. And then lastly, what does advocacy look like, right? So how are you going to measure your brand ambassadors, your evangelists, the ones who are your VIP members, right? And again, there's no fixed formula, but this is a framework just to help you at least look at, figure out ways in which to group those metrics together, and then elicit some of those insights, right? So it's just really kind of a way to kind of put some structure around what you're seeing that might be in a one-to-one model, and figuring out kind of what can you do to translate that information and figure out what you're looking for. So when we do strategic metric analysis, when we sit down with our clients, we really kind of tie it down to, the first question is we tie it to goals, right? So it's not enough to say that we just want to learn if our audience is engaged. That's not enough of a question, right? So you really want to get very specific, and ask that question, what do you want to learn from your target audience and why? You want to get a little bit more specific, right? So let's say you have a new program. So you have a new program and you want to know who likes the program and who dislikes the program, right? Having a question like this to start with makes it a little bit easier to figure out, okay, I know what I'm wanting to answer. I know what I'm looking to answer. Now I have to go and find my data sources. Let me go through the list, figure out what are all my data points. How can I group them together? Because I know a one-on-one is probably, like a one-to-one is probably not going to give me the insight, right? But if I string them together and say, I'm looking for people who obviously received all my communications about the new program, they liked it in the capacity that they attended the program, and then they filled out the survey at the end and they told me, right? I'm going to treat that as, that's someone who likes the program. What do we interpret dislike as? Is dislike interpreted to be, did they share an actual negative comment with you, or was it more disinterest and they just didn't bother opening the emails, they didn't do anything, they chose not to participate at all, right? So again, it's subjective in matter, but it helps you kind of start to sift through some of these metrics and figure out which ones are appropriate for measurement so that you can get some sort of insight from here. Same thing for if you were looking for, if you had a new program and you were looking to figure out what the improvements were, right? So, how could I improve on my program? Now you could do the traditional model of, let me just ask people, I'll send a survey. So that's one dimension and one component of it. It's a little bit limited because you are not guaranteed to get a response from everyone, but certainly if you interpret or you observe what their actual behavior is in all of your digital properties, you could glean some insights from that as well, right? So perhaps the new program improvements need to be not necessarily about the program content, since everyone seems to respond very positively, right? They're downloading the ebook, they're looking at the white paper, they're reading the emails, they're liking what we're posting on Twitter or on LinkedIn based on promoting the program itself, right? But, they really seem to get stuck on actually buying the program, right? Signing up and actually registering. They just don't seem to do it, right? That kind of gives you a direction in which to look at, to say, okay, let's take a step further. Let's look at the email, let's look at the e-commerce pages that are on the website. Is there something from a technical standpoint that prevents people from putting things into their shopping cart? Or is it simply this is not really what I thought it would be, right? So again, if you look at those then metrics, right, if you then look at those metrics that are specific They're able to tell that story and interpret that. And that's what a lot of this is about, right? So the problem, and it's the biggest challenge that we find in our organizational base today, is that most organizations often get caught up in the, I don't know where to find them. I know they're out there. I know those metrics are out there. One, I don't know where to find them. And then two, I'm not quite sure what to do with them. And then three, everyone is a little bit different. And what I mean by that is that every organization or every department views these metrics in a different way, right? There has to be some acknowledgement that these metrics are kind of universal. They belong to everyone, right? So if education is looking at something, they're looking at it from the same lens and same perspective as membership. And membership is looking at it from the same lens and perspective as governance, right? So different ways in which to look at that information. Another typical question that could tie into insights is how effective are your digital marketing channels, right? So that's a pretty good question, because then it starts to get into, okay, so let's start with what are your digital marketing channels? What channels do you have out there? How often do you use them, right? Our target audience, are they aligned, right? Do we have personas in place that actually say that we know this persona or this target audience uses this channel in this way, right? Therefore, do we have some sort of benchmark? Do we have a baseline against which to compare to say that, oh, this channel is more popularly used, because we can tie it back to what we know about our members from a psychographic perspective, from a demographic perspective, or just from some sort of behavioral insights that we've already collected, right? So a lot of this is additive. A lot of this is, there's part science to it, there's part art to put it together, but these are the things that you're always looking to answer, right? And so it is always kind of delving deeper, and that's what marketers are always looking for. So for those of you who are sitting in the IT world, you may think that marketers are kind of crazy, like, oh my God, they come to me with the last minute request. They want to know all this stuff at the last minute. Why can't they prepare in advance? And, why can't the query be the same, right? One month it's one query, another month it's two other different queries, completely different. Then they go back and they want to take that same query results, but now refine it further. And the reason we do this is, again, we're looking for those insights. Every time we look for an insight, it's typically based on what additional learned behavior that we've already interpreted or observed. All right, so another typical question, why does your member consume one program but not another? Right, so think about kind of ways in which you would go about to break these down, but this is often what helps you tie back data to the insights that you might be looking for. So going back to our multidimensional data model here, the picture back up again. So now knowing what we've talked about, the data is sitting out there, here are all the available metrics that are available to you now, right? So if you're thinking about how do I gain insights into all the activities that my consumer, my targeted member might be doing, I can get insights from the email preference center. The email preference center gives me a full view of what topics my user is interested in, as well as what topics they're not interested in. So again, if you're doing program development, and if you're thinking about putting a new program together, it'll be wise to kind of check to see, right? Because typically an email preference center is reflective of the base. It's very real time in the sense that people, if they don't want to receive the information, they're going to update it in real time. So it gives you often a pulse on kind of what the interests are at that individual level. Your email automation system also is a good source of available information that you can glean additional insights from, right? It drives a lot of the other pieces, right? So you've got an automation system sitting there ready to trigger off based on behavior or patterns that are being set up by your administrator, right? So from that perspective, it often kicks off event marketing activities. It can kick off renewals. It can kick off promotions if the person's interested in something else, and then it kicks off another promotional event, right, or promotional actual activity that's triggered, right? So there's a wealth of data in there, more from the perspective from the buyer's user journey, right? It is no longer keying off of the person opened the email, therefore let's have the behavior start, the interpretation of that behavior start with the opening of the email. It is more driven on all the other aspects that are sitting out there, right? Marketing automation tools sit out there ready to kind of send out all these automated campaigns based on what you're doing kind of in the world of digital marketing, not in email marketing, right? So if you come to a landing page, if you are on the website and you looked at 3 pages, we want to send something to say that we know you've looked at the following 3 pages. You probably are going to be interested in this, which you may not know about. Right? So it's ways in which to collect that information, but it's sitting on a wealth of information driven from buyer's journey guide. Of course, your email marketing system is sitting out there, right? It's collecting data as well. Obviously, it's collecting, it's a very good indicator of whether an email address is legitimate, as well as your open rates and your click-through rates. Some of these metrics that you collect are data points in time, right? So it's not to say you sent one email out and it performed very well because it had, a 75% open rate and a 45% click-through rate. You can claim success that, the program is working well for that one email. That one email performed very well, right? However, you're limited in kind of saying what kind of additional insights can you gain from that, right? You're a little limited, right? So again, open rates and click-through rates are kind of marketing 101 from a metric standpoint. It doesn't mean that you don't want to track them. You do, but typically they're combined or rolled together kind of higher up with another index or a composite, something along those lines. Then, of course, you've got your website over here at the right, sitting on a ton of data that you can tap into. I recently did an analysis with one of our clients, the American Association of Clinical Chemists. They looked at their website statistics. We walked through a couple of them, and then there was a comment about bounce rates, right? And essentially saying that, overall, they have a really good high level of activity on the site. Their website visitors are split between new and returning, with the new website visitors actually kind of outperforming the returning visitors, which is kind of nice to see. You have a lot of growth. There's high levels of activity. There's a duration time of spent about 2.5 minutes or so, and the bounce rate is relatively high. So one, bounce rates alone are probably not the indicator that they used to be. I would argue in the past, bounce rates identified alone would be viewed as positive or negative, right? Everyone always wants to get that bounce rate down, right? But if you're thinking about now kind of in the world of your user, your personas and kind of how they interact with you across all your channels, if they spend 2.5 minutes on your site getting the information they need and then leaving, do you qualify that as a success because they spent that amount of time, or do you qualify that as a failure because they left after that visit? Their bounce, because that contributed to the bounce rate, right? So it's a very kind of, one side, it's a delicate art of balancing, kind of interpreting these results, right? But the whole point is to kind of say, we're now in the world model and world modern view of looking at all of these statistics at a comprehensive level and not. Okay, that's a little strange. If somebody can text me and let me know, or chat me in the window and let me know that they can hear me, that would be great.
Goodbye.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that, everyone. I'll give it a couple of minutes if somebody can chat and let me know if they can still hear me. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Sorry about that. I'm going to have to follow up and see what's going on. So I guess it's time to move on and stop obsessing about page view visits and bounce rates. So anyway, so just to kind of wrap up on that piece, page visits alone, bounce rates alone, not the way to evaluate or get much insight. However, I've told you the story of how you can construct it together, right? So as with many of these metrics that are available, The whole point of this now, because you're looking at it from that holistic view, is to be able to kind of get those insights, and it's a lot easier to kind of sift through some of that information and get through it. Again, from an e-commerce perspective, anything that you're doing kind of in the world of e-commerce, is a data point that you can translate into insights. We often talk about VIP members, right, in the world of kind of who do we want to target and who do we want to further grow with. There's usually kind of the toss-up of, like, do we go after the people who have ignored us? How much do we do with them versus what do we do with the people who do interact with us, right? And that's hard because that's a very different shift from traditional association marketing, where we've done mass volume, where we've tried to send as many emails as possible to everyone at a high volume, and larger numbers are better instead of the targeted ones, right? So that requires a little bit of discipline and kind of a move down that funnel, right? But from this perspective, if you're looking for your VIP members, you probably kind of qualify them to say, my VIP members are the ones who have probably opened a couple of emails over the past 2 months or so, but more importantly, they've purchased something from me within the past year. These are the people that you can directly influence from a revenue standpoint. Right? So again, when you take those data points and you put them all together, you probably want to think about, like, what insights can I derive? I've got my email preference center that's typically kind of gauging and storing, here are all my fields of study, my interest areas that I'm interested in. Now I'm overlaying them with all the stuff I've purchased, through the e-commerce platform. Now I'm going to overlay it on top of that with where I've been on your website. So what can we glean from that? What programs are most popular? Which topics have a lot of potential for growth because we don't have any products, we don't have any programs around it, but it's at minimum everybody seems to be subscribed to that particular topic. There are a lot of ways in which you can approach it, but the whole point is to kind of overlay things on top of each other and not treat that raw data from a one-to-one kind of data point standpoint. So now we're going to be moving to a model that talks about a lot of ratios, right? So in the world of business marketing, we're always now looking, ROI is a big metric, right? This is the one that we always want to measure, right? But there are all these other things that you can kind of float up to the surface and start to measure and point to, right? So you've got average page views per visit, the average time on a site, average cost per page view, right? So some of these move into your operations world, which again, from a marketing perspective, at some point, someone will likely ask you, is it worth the spend, right? So we're doing all this stuff, we've got great statistics, that's great, should we do this next year? Is it worth the spend, right? And so you're going to need to be in a position to answer by having some of these metrics and these ratios available to you. So what's your rate of return on visitors? That's also an important one, so it's great that you've got high activity on your website. But what does that look like? Are you doing repeat business? Who's coming back? Is it the right people who are coming back? And in turn, are they buying something? Can we tie them directly to revenue? Same thing for cost per click. So I think that one is pretty standard across the board because it's often what we do when we're doing paid media, right? But there are conversion rates that you want to track, and then cost per lead as well. Right, so as we move from that member retention model into the growth acquisition model, we're going to hear this more and more of how much effort did it take to generate this new customer, this new member, right, this new lead. What did we put out there and what was the cost and the spend and was it worth it again? All tying back to the ROI and, again, another cost to acquire a customer. So these are the things that your metrics are going to kind of start to reveal to you now, which again, you tie back to insights, right? But it all starts with figuring out kind of what is that combination and what is that ideal view. So I'm going to leave you guys today with, the image again. I'm just going to point out here just to close the loop. You often hear us talk about new data. You talk to us here about marketing automation and how all that works together, especially with regards to growth. Right? So in the model before, we had all our pieces kind of working happily together, but we didn't have anybody new coming into our system. It was what we call a closed technology stack. Great. Works very well for a membership retention model where you've got all your emails and your members, you've got your data in there and you are working them to move them along the funnel. But if you're looking for growth, right, we need to introduce kind of a component here, and that's where this is, right? So this is all the, the marketing automation pieces which tap into getting new members, right? Because again, all the data and insights that you've elicited here, kind of in the central model, right, is all based on the data that you have at hand, right? So you're doing a great job in being able to kind of elicit that information, tie it back and refine your programs. You also want to use those same insights to get new leads, right? So it's like you're going to have to go to, you're not really in a position to go to a completely different model where you've got a completely different ecosystem working out there where you're going to be able to kind of, get another set of leads to figure, or another set of insights to get to your new leads, right? So all of this is additive work, but what you're doing is you're collecting additional insights to say that now that I know how my program should work, right? Now that I know that everybody really likes to attend the in-person event, what can I do to get more people to gravitate towards that? Let's work with what we have. Let's set up a landing page to kind of inform people. Let's set up marketing automation so that, we can target people in a specific geographic location with an upcoming webinar so that we don't have to manually have staff put it together and pull a list based on their zip code and then put it in there and then send them reminders. Forget about that. Let's set up something that's automated. It checks on your main profile data to see where you live, what your actual business address is, where you work, what time is, so that we can figure out, like, hey, if it's during business hours, let's look at your business address, where your place of work is, and let's send you the whole list of here are all the upcoming events in your area, right? So you're starting to kind of tap into what you already know, right, to do more to generate those leads. So then you've got your banner ads, you've got AdWords, you've got social media, all working in that little component piece right down here that in turn feeds everything back, right? So what you're doing is you're expanding your universe to collect the data and the insights that you have so that you in return can kind of further refine those. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. That's where I'm going to leave it today. I think it's a lot of information to absorb. We will be sending out the deck, so certainly feel free to kind of download that and take a look again. I encourage you this month, data is something that's a complicated topic. I encourage you to kind of reach out to me in advance if you have specific questions related to this and what type of member insights you might be looking for, or if you need, further assistance with just figuring out what those insights, like how do you even go about finding what, or, how to know what to even look for, things along those lines. So we'll be doing a deeper dive next week, talking about best practices from that standpoint. Just again, kind of observations that we've had from the field and what other organizations kind of in our roster have been doing with regards to this and how they've been monitoring and collecting insights. And then we'll be talking about, again, how do you put the whole picture together using this framework, and talk a little bit more in detail about this. So certainly, again, I encourage you to join us. And as I said, if you have any other questions, or if you'd like, if you have examples to share, you can always use examples. I'm happy to include them, as a little bit of a working case study, hands-on, so that we can talk about them further. So I'm going to leave the line open. Thank you for bearing with me again through the technical complications here, but I'll leave the line open. If anyone has any questions, they can put them into the chat window, and I'll be happy to answer them. If not, thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.